Hello, we're rolling into another episode of the DRH Show. As usual, in each episode, I'll be talking to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and well-being. Today, I'm joined by a psychotherapist and author. He's also the founder of Alternatives, which is a spiritual events platform in London. Malcolm Stan, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Dennis. Lovely to see you.
It's great to have you here, Malcolm. Let's start off with you telling us your backstory, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Well, I started off going to public school and then becoming an accountant, and then thinking I was making a major shift by becoming an estate agent. Mm-hmm. And I had a real shift in, something happened inside my head that really made a change in my life. And I just thought, I want to have my life be of some value. And I started doing things that, my friends all thought I was crazy. I was doing things like working in old people's day centre and working in a terminal cancer hospice. I wanted to get meaning in my life. And then I got a job for a while with Greenpeace on the Rainbow Warrior, and I sailed on the Rainbow Warrior. And then I went into therapy, my own personal therapy. And then I went to a therapy group. And the second I walked in there, I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. This is more than 30 years ago. And I've never really looked back on that. That's been my main thing, is that psychotherapy groups, which is the main thing I run. Mm-hmm. And I've written 3 books. My third, which is coming out in September this year, is called Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. And I have the advanced copy here. Mm-hmm. And Eckhart Tolle, you'll see on the front, has given me a lovely endorsement on the book, as well as Liz Gilbert of Eat, Pray, Love, and Craig David, and other sort of luminaries. So I feel like I've written my legacy, really. That's mm-hmm. what I feel.
Mm. Congratulations on having written your book. We'll talk more about that in more detail later. What I'd like to ask you now is, so what made you train as a therapist? Is there something of a backstory behind that decision?
Well, interestingly, when I was young, I'd wanted to be a doctor, and I didn't really have the scientific leaning. But there's something about the therapeutic process that actually fits my psyche. I feel like I can go there with other people, and I can really listen to them and go deeply with them. And that's something that's expanded over the years. I feel myself much more intuitively able to find the right path with the people I work with.
Mm-hmm. And
it's a thing that fits me, basically.
You really have to be, genuinely interested with people to, flourish in this field as a psychotherapist. Now, I'm just wondering, what type of psychotherapy do you specialize in, and what attracted you to that particular approach?
Yeah, I'm involved with the humanistic and the transpersonal psychotherapy approaches, and they are both they're both the more intuitive branches. So you've got things like psychoanalysis, which is very sort of intellectual, but you've got the more intuitive and heartful. They're what I'm interested. I'm interested in connecting through my heart to what's going on around me.
Mm-hmm. And do you also do group therapy or just individual therapy?
No, I do mainly group therapy. So I have since 1990, every year, I've been running a 1-year group, which meets 1 weekend a month, and then a 4-day retreat at the end. So the same group meet again and again, and then you're working on the same stuff. But you're getting to trust people. You're getting to learn the skills of giving authentic feedback and about not hiding behind whatever bullshit you want to throw up.
What would you say is the main strength and disadvantage of group therapy as opposed to individual therapy?
Well, I was in individual therapy for 3 years before I discovered group psychotherapy. And after I'd done a year of group psychotherapy training, I felt it was like 10 years of therapy. For me, there's something so profound about working within a group that you're getting yourself mirrored by lots of other people. So you're getting to see yourself through other people's eyes. And you're getting to trust, you're learning to trust each other, to give authentic feedback, not feedback that either makes you feel good or attacks you.
And you've also been a couples therapist. So what sort of issues do you come up? What sort of issues come up time and time again?
Well, time and time up again, couples start off, there's great sex, they think each other are gorgeous, amazing, fantastic, they found their soulmate, often it becomes their cellmate as well. And so I think with couples, what I've seen is that after the honeymoon period wears off, what you start to get is the reality starts to set in. So there's something like, for a while, everything is gorgeous. And what I call falling in love is the temporary lifting of critical faculties.
Mm-hmm.
So once that fades, then you've got all the communication issues that go. And also, sex will not last at that high level that we've been looking at as well. There's often when you meet someone who you're really attuned to, it's like you found something that feels like it's so precious and so blissful.
Mm-hmm.
But that will wear off. If you don't fertilize the ground of the relationship,
mm-hmm.
the sexuality will wear off, or the sexuality becomes the whole basis of the relationship, and there's no real soul in the thing.
Mm-hmm. I know it's quite challenging to try to pinpoint a specific let's say a specific time frame when would this happen. But based from your experience, would you say that this is likely to be experienced by couples within 10 years or later than that?
Well, the falling in love period is often anything from 6 months to a year or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the couples don't normally hit the grids, hit the skids at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens is that bit by bit, the relationships often start to disintegrate, mm-hmm. and they find that there's no real communication anymore. They're not interested in each other anymore. There's a sort of a lack of genuine heart connection. And, mm-hmm. and my job when I'm working with couples is to try and reignite that heart connection. Now, I did a series in 2003 and 2004 for Channel 4 called Made for Each Other. Mm-hmm. And I had co-presented that with a divorce lawyer. And what we did is we had CCTV cameras in a couple's house for 2 weeks solid, mm-hmm. watching their every move. I mean, obviously not the bathroom and other things like that, but watching pretty much most of their moves. And you'd start to see where the gaps were in the relationship. And then we'd call them into the studio, mm-hmm. and we'd sort of start to give them some techniques and practices to try and upskill them in relationship. And that's been very much my whole thing around not just relationships, but around people working with me as well. That what I'm looking for is what are the practices we can take on that we can use to really develop the way we are in the world with people, in our intimate relationships and in all our friendships.
Mm-hmm. Now, Malcolm, you've been a therapist for a number of years now, and you said you do couples therapy and you also do individual therapy. But what I'm interested to hear from you is that is it also possible to be your own therapist, or as a therapist, do you sort of resort to, seeking other therapists' advice and, help?
It's a very good question, Dennis, because I think that actually I have a philosophy, and this is, I don't know if you've ever heard of the I Ching, which is a Chinese oracle. Mm-hmm. Confucius said at the age of 70, he'd started to grasp the rudimentaries of it. Now, one of the things in the I Ching says that until we reach a certain stage in our evolution, not only do we have the need for the support of others of like mind, we have a duty to seek that support. And what that means to me is that I'm not an island. Mm-hmm. I will have blind spots, and I'm going to find places where I'm struggling. And the best thing I can have are people who I build a trust situation with, who can support me. So we run support. I do every Monday morning at 8:30. I do an hour with a friend on Zoom, and we spend half an hour each talking about what's going on for us, and the other one that gets to reflect back at the end of that time, and then the other one shares. And very often, having that dedicated time, you find that things come up that normally wouldn't come up. And then I've got other groups. I'm part of a men's group which meets once every 2 or 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And in that we talk about our issues, and we get hopefully wise reflection from each other.
Mm-hmm. As I've mentioned earlier, another aspect of what you do, you're not just a psychotherapist, but you've also worked with many of the world's spiritual leaders. You've co-founded Alternatives. So if you could just talk us through what is Alternatives. I understand this is a spiritual event platform based in London, but what exactly are you trying to achieve with this platform? And also what led you to co-found it?
I'll start with the second bit then.
Yeah, sorry.
1982, I was in a play called The Cosmic Celebration, mm-hmm. which was initiated by Pir Vilayat Khan, who was the Sufi leader. Mm-hmm. And it was taking place in this church called St. James's Church. Now, The Cosmic Celebration was the story of the masters, saints and prophets of all traditions throughout the ages. And it was quite way out there. And I was dancing in this play. And at the end of the presentation, the rector of the church, Donald Reeves, came out and he said, every church in the land should have a cosmic celebration. I thought, wow, this guy is really switched on. This feels like a very broad sort of spectrum of Christianity. So I started speaking to him and I said, would you be interested in putting on a series which are exploring some of these ideas? And we started doing this, a friend of mine and I started doing this. And we'd have 5 or 6 people, we'd sit in the coffee house in the church and have chats about spirituality. And then bit by bit it started to grow, and we started to move into the church and do it regularly on a Monday night. And then I came across Roger Housden, who runs the Open Gate Trust, or ran the Open Gate Trust in those days. And Roger was starting to bring across a lot of the really big speakers from America and all over the world. And he was putting on workshops with them. He was looking for places for them to speak. So we did a deal with him where we would organize the talk before the workshops. And suddenly our audiences started being a couple of hundred. And we had people like Ram Dass, Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist teacher, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the doyen of death and dying, Eckhart Tolle. We had a lot of the major speakers on the world circuit started to come through our doors. And that's been running now for 38 years. And it is a go-to place for people who are exploring their own spirituality.
So how do you marry psychological with spiritual? Because, you know, at first glance, they're not really compatible. You know, science, or psychology, although it's a social science, it's a bit of a gray area compared to physics, but it's still a science. Whereas spiritual, it's, you know, we can't argue that this is really a subjective area. So how do you marry these two?
Well, I think the psychological for me, is a mix between the scientific and the intuitive. So I feel like I studied humanistic psychology, but I feel like as a psychologist, psychotherapist, I'm working very much. I remember a guy saying to me once, he said, he was a scientist who was exploring the nuclear program in the UK. He said to me, you're a scientist because you've worked with thousands of people and you're able to start seeing the same patterns come up again and again. So there's something about the psychological where you start to recognize that we actually only have a limited range. We think we're so unique and so individual and that everything happens to us, but actually we are within a range of human experience. We are part of an experiment on planet Earth, actually, about what it is to be human. And, you know, relationships, for example, weren't thought of as growth places until the 1970s. I mean, you know, if you watch something like Mad Men, you'll see the typical 1950s housewife will be making food when the husband comes home and all this sort of stuff. And bit by bit, things have started to seep into the psychological. Now, along with that, I think there's been a real hunger for the spiritual, for getting real meaning in life, which is different from religious. It is really about embracing the fact that we are much more than this random package of flesh and bones that we seem to think we are. And I've had a fascination with that for nearly 40 years. And so there's been a major sort of like journey into the spiritual. And I mix that with the psychological, because I think for a lot of people who are involved with spirituality, there can often be what is called spiritual bypassing. And in spiritual bypassing, you sort of like, you think you've arrived somewhere. So in my 30s, which is quite a long time ago now these days, but in my 30s, I used to wear only white and I'd talk in a very soft voice. And I thought I was 1 inch away from enlightenment. But actually, I was full of spiritual bullshit, if you'll excuse the language. And I had to learn the hard way through a number of life lessons that came at me, that actually spirituality is a hard-won thing. You know, you don't suddenly overnight become spiritually imbued. So someone like Eckhart Tolle has suffered enormously in order to become the spiritual teacher he's become. And you'll find with most of the great spiritual teachers, and most of the great artists, authors, teachers, they've had to go through a lot of suffering in order for that spirituality to be hatched in them.
Now, Malcolm, let's move on to another aspect of your work. Can you talk us through about your work with compassionate mental health and how did this come about?
Well, that was quite a number, actually. So in 2014, my daughter Melissa took her own life. And I never know how I'm going to respond when I say that. Sometimes tears will come, and I'll never stop them if they do come.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'll be quite matter of fact. And I went through a process of grieving and reevaluating my whole life. And a few months after that, a woman called Bridget Bowen contacted me from Compassionate Mental Health. She knew nothing about Melissa, but she knew that I was a facilitator, and she started to put on these gatherings that are going to be happening in Wales. And they're for people who've gone through mental health turmoil, who've gone through suicide, who've gone through breakdowns, all this sort of stuff. And I said, Bridget, do you know what I've been through? And she said, no, I just know that you're a facilitator. And I told her about Melissa. She said, oh my God. She said, well, this is the right place for you. So I thought at the first conference that I would go along and educate people. And what I realized is that I was being educated. And what I saw there, it's a gathering which is a mixture of people who are profoundly involved in their own journey through their own mental health, or people who are in the helping professions, psychiatrists. One of the people who's been teaching there is Joe Burke, who co-founded the Arbors Association with R.D. Laing. By the way, R.D. Laing was someone I put on at Alternatives back in the 80s. What it is, it's a place where people share deeply. So I start the conferences by sharing Melissa's story, and I'll tell it as raw as it comes out. And what I'm doing in that is I'm giving permission for people to talk truly and honestly about the depths of their feelings. Mm-hmm. And the conference normally lasts for 2 or 3 days. And you'll find that during that time, there's an immense trust that gets built. And I also run a workshop there called Sharing Our Stories. And people will talk about what's happened to them in this life. And what we've stopped doing in this conference and in a lot of the things that are associated with that is you don't label mental illness anymore. Someone is not schizophrenic or manic depressive or bipolar. They are, something has happened to them that has caused them to lose contact with their core. And our job in that environment is to help put them back in touch with their trust, to help to create a sort of community that will support them in being able to take on their mental well-being. Mm-hmm. So the official figures say 1 in 4 people have mental health issues. My figures are 1 in 1 people have it. We all have mental health in the same way as we all have physical health. And at times we're all going to be pushed towards the edge. And our task is to try and stay sane, to gather around us community, people of like mind who can support us in finding our way through the trials and tribulations of life, because life is not easy. We are not in a playground here. Sometimes we'll have fun, but it's like a lot of the time we have to really struggle with our well-being, our mental health, with our connection to our source.
Mm-hmm. Malcolm, this is really a sensitive life event, what you've experienced, what your family has experienced with, what happened to your daughter. But can you tell us how your daughter's experience, suicide impacted your ability as a therapist?
Absolutely, yeah. And by the way, I know it's a sensitive area, but it's an area I love to go to because I like to keep her memory alive. And I also feel like she's changed me. In the process of her dying, something in me deepened and changed. And so there's been a profound shift in me as well. So how it's affected me is that I feel much more on the case with my other children. I've got 2 children from my marriage, my former marriage. And Melissa was a child from a different relationship. So I feel like I've had to really take on the fact that we're vulnerable as human beings, and I've really made sure that I'm on the case with them. As a psychotherapist, my work has changed because I feel able to go to very dark places with people now, places which I might have avoided, not consciously, but I might have not had the balls to go to those places before. But I find that because I've been there, it's almost like I've become a member of a club. I don't want to be a member of this club, but the truth is I am a member of this club of people who've been bereaved. And sometimes when we've been through hell ourselves, we can bring something back to others to help them, to help support them. So I feel like it's changed my life. And then I decided about 3 years ago to write a book, which was inspired by Melissa's life and death, but was also inspired by the practices that I can see that I thought I was teaching others, but actually these practices are my practices. They're the practices I have. Practices like kindness, like finding a sense of purpose, like building a Sangha, building a community of like-minded others. When Melissa died, I really needed to draw on my support systems, because it throws, something like that throws you. You can never look at life quite the same again. But I found myself warming to Melissa's husband, Ian, and actually really taking him on. And no longer was he someone who was married to my daughter, but he was my son-in-law, he was my family. I'd never quite seen him in that way. And I think my heart has blossomed in this place. And I feel like there's been a hidden gem in this, even though the suffering is enormous. There is also an awakening that's happened. And Michael Mead, the psychologist, said that in order to truly become who we are, not only does our heart have to break, it has to break many times. And there's no question that my heart broke when my daughter left this planet.
Understandably. Now, Malcolm, did you see any signs with her?
Yes. So 10 years previously, she'd had a serious mental breakdown. And she'd rung me up and I'd answer the phone. She said, "Hello, Dad, I'm in a lunatic asylum." I said, "Very funny, Melissa." And she passed the phone to a nurse. And the nurse, she was in an intensive care psychiatric unit. And she'd had a complete breakdown. I mean, I hadn't seen signs of that coming, but it came. And it took her about a year to get through this. She was drugged up to the eyeballs. She had a horrendous time in mental health. And after a year, very slowly, she began to emerge. And she seemed to have completely found herself. And for the next 10 years, she seemed completely normal. And I noticed about a year before she died that she'd started to get very high again, started to do to be really wild again. And it was a manic episode in her life. And they had diagnosed her as bipolar the first time around, which she had completely refuted and said that that wasn't what it was. And she was trying very hard to get the records rewritten. But I could certainly start to see that she was getting very high. And she was quite difficult to communicate with during this time. And we struggled quite a bit in our relationship. And then after this period of high, which lasted quite a lot of months, actually, by the way, she was working for a kids company at the time who were looking after some of the most damaged children in our society, were looking after. And she was a real hard worker, so she would give herself to helping kids. And then after the high, then the depression came in. And I think that unless we've really experienced what deep depression is, it's just a word. We think it's like sadness, or we think it's something that we can shrug off. But she was so deep in this place of depression, it was as though all the colour had gone out of her. And I realised she was not in great shape at that stage. But it was still an incredible shock. One never thinks, or I never thought, that my daughter would take her own life. And it was very strange when her mother rang me and said, "Melissa's not with us anymore." And I said, "Well, she's not staying with you anymore." And she said, "No, she's died. She's taken her own life." And I went into shock. But I did see that happening over a good year of her time, having thought that she'd come through and magnificently conquered her mental breakdown.
That's a really very challenging experience, and thank you for sharing your story. And I'm quite sure that a number of people, whether they've have experience of someone dying of suicide, that they could, that story could resonate with them. But thank you for sharing that. Now, I just want to move on to, because earlier you just shared to us that you've written a book. So did that experience actually influence your writing a book, Slay Your Dragons with Compassion?
Here it is. This is my book. I'm really excited about this book. Basically, I didn't set about to write Melissa's story. I kept writing about Melissa. I wrote a poem after she died, which I posted on Facebook. And I kept writing sort of things for myself, but never really getting anywhere. And then I realized that actually I was going through a process. Melissa's life and death were linked with the psychotherapy work I'd been doing for the past 30 years. So I've done a book that's married the two together. This is, an honoring of Melissa. I feel like it's what I've done in writing this book is I have actually exorcised something. I have really visited something around Melissa. But also at the same time, I've put together 10 practices for people to undergo in order to get their lives in shape. And I feel like the book, I'd written 2 other books before, both about relationships, but I feel like this book is a book that has given Melissa's life meaning, but has also given my whole existence. I've written what I've discovered in my 70 years on this planet. What I've discovered is in this book. So yeah, it's had a big effect on me.
And you mentioned a Buddhist term earlier, Sangha. If you could just tell us what it is.
Yeah, one of the practices is called create a Sangha. Now, the Buddhists have a term called Sangha, which is about spiritual community. It means hanging out, being with people of like mind. And it's a place where we get to refresh and renew our spirituality. And for me, in the modern day and age, I feel like we also need Sanghas. We don't need to be praying together or meditating together necessarily, but we need to be around people who are going to inspire us. Now, I've been very lucky with alternatives because I've mixed and met with some amazing people like Eckhart Tolle, Marianne Williamson, Ram Dass, Thich Nhat Hanh. These are people I've sort of spent time with. And for me, I have something of that Sangha at alternatives. So, you know, because people come on a spiritual quest. But I also have that Sangha in my own life, in the friendships that I have, in the relationships that I have. They are places where I'm looking to be truly met in who I am. And that there's a practice in not trying to pretend everything's fine and dandy. So one of the things I often say to people is when someone asks, how are you? They say fine. And I say, well, that normally means fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotionally unstable. There's something about Sangha, about being who we truly are and having a safe place to allow ourselves to be seen with what's going on. So for me, when Melissa died, interestingly, I had started a couple of years before that a death group where people were exploring their attitudes towards death, which is also one of the chapters in the book, Befriend Death. And I was able to bring my experience of Melissa's death to this death group, with people who were already looking at their own lives, their own potential, their own inevitable death, and the people that have died around them as well. And it became a very safe place. It became part of my Sangha as well.
Now, you also talk about the ricochet effect. So can you also explain that?
Yeah, so in groups, very often what will happen is that someone will be working on something. They'll be doing a deep process of exploration, and perhaps it's about a relationship they'd had. And suddenly someone else in the group will go, oh my God, and they'll sort of like something in them will be triggered. And that's what I call the ricochet effect, that actually they weren't consciously looking at that, but this was waiting to be, it was like a ripe fruit was waiting to be plucked. So what would happen is that they would be triggered by that other person's work, and then it would open a doorway for what the ricochet would open a doorway where something could come through, and you go, okay, I understand. And then you'd be able to look at this scenario in your own life, which you may not have discovered under your own steam, but because you've bounced off someone within the group. So I'll give you a little example of that if I can. There was a guy in one of my groups, and he was, this was in a holiday group in Skiros in Greece, where I go every year, except not this year, sadly, because of the lockdown. But and he was saying that he really felt the need to have someone touch his face, that he felt very untouched, and he really wanted someone to do that. And there's a strange thing to ask, but a couple of people in the group went up and touched his face. And suddenly, at the side of the group, a sobbing came along, and there was a woman there, and she'd lost her boyfriend. It was the love of her life. She'd been with him for 4 years. And before he died, she would stroke his face. And when she saw this happening, suddenly she got the ricochet in a really big way. And she got right in touch with his death, which she was then able to share with the entire group and have a very deep place of being witnessed in the place of suffering. So that was a powerful ricochet.
Now, Malcolm, your book also emphasizes authenticity and also kindness. Now, do you think these are easy to achieve in combination? Because, you know, sometimes when we think about authenticity, you have to be, you know, truthful, and sometimes we don't want to offend people. So how do you reconcile these two? Can we be authentic and be kind? Because, you know, at a first glance, again, they don't normally seem to go together.
Well, that's a very good question indeed, Dennis, actually, and it's one that I have wrestled with for most of my life. So with authenticity, with the chapter Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, which is the title chapter of the book, it's about being able to say what needs to be said to another person without being unkind. So William Blake said, true challenge is a mark of friendship. And there is something about not trashing the other person, but being able to say what's needed to be said in a way that they can hear. So my golden rules for these two are: 1, speak your truth, and 2, never hurt the other more than is necessary. We are not going to go through life not hurting other people. And if we try to do that, we'll walk on cotton wool or on eggshells around people, because we'll try to be nice. And I grew up in a family where people tried to be nice. I grew up in a family where my mother would tell white lies because she would never want to say what was true in case it hurt people. But I learned not to trust through that. And I've had to really re-educate myself to find the place of integrity and authenticity in me. And it is my practice now to say what needs to be said, not out of a need to be better than the other person, but in order to have an honest relationship with them. For example, if I were to say to you, well, Dennis, you know, obviously you're talking a load of crap. You're either going to go, okay, and you're going to withdraw, or you're going to come back fighting. But actually, if I say to you, Dennis, I would like to challenge what you just said about ... That's right. I don't want to challenge anything you've said so far, just so you know. But if I said I'd like to challenge that, and I started to say, when you said that, I felt ... I felt some anger arise. I'm starting to engage with you and giving you an opportunity to take a look at your own stuff. I'm not judging you, and I'm making it about my response to you. But if I notice, especially when I'm running a group, if I notice someone is not authentic, then something's going on. And so the best thing that I can do with them is to create a compassionate challenge where I find out what's going on. And often people are withdrawn because they're feeling pain and they just want to avoid it and they want to shut down. But when we meet people, even in a place where it's uncomfortable, we start to build trust if we're doing it from a genuine place, from a place of integrity.
Now, you mentioned something about going, trying to reflect what happened with our life. So I'm just wondering, how easy do you think it is for us to rewrite our stories if we think that we feel the need to do that? And, if we're rewriting our stories and not come from a place of reactivity?
I think in every life we have many incarnations. So I was Malcolm the estate agent. I was Malcolm the Greenpeace Rainbow Warrior. I was Malcolm the sort of like the public school boy. And I'm now Malcolm the would-be teacher, therapist. And I found that life has changed me over the years, and I've moved with that. So I don't see that life is one long continuum, although it is. I see that life gives us lots of opportunities to take different paths. And so I think that if we really feel enough inspiration, I tried to write a book. My last book I wrote in 2004, and I've been trying to write a book ever since. And it wasn't until I had something that was genuinely ripe in me that I was able to write Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. But before that, I wasn't ripe. And I think there's something about when we're ripe, then the opportunities come our way. Carl Jung, the psychotherapist, said that everything is synchronicity. Things come in our path. We don't even know where they are. We meet people. We meet the right people at the right time. And sometimes our lives can change as a result of meeting that person. And we can take a totally different trajectory. So what I see is that I'm in a constant process of following the trail, because at the end of the day, there's no arrival. I'm on a journey through life, and the only arrival will be death. And that's not a sort of like, a horrible thought. It's actually something that we need to embrace. But while I'm alive, I want to live as truthfully and as meaningfully as I possibly can.
And Malcolm, is there a particular individual who has the greatest influence in your work? I mean, you've done a lot. You're an author and you're a psychotherapist, but who's that a piece of work or an author who has really made an impact on you?
Yeah, I think for me, do you know Ram Dass? Have you come across Ram Dass?
No.
No. Yeah. So he was Richard Alpert, he was a psychology professor, and along with Timothy Leary, back in the 1950s, 60s, they were experimenting with LSD as a legitimate psychology experimentation. And he went to India, found his guru, and came back as one of the greatest teachers And I was very fortunate. I put him on at Alternatives in the 80s, and I went on retreat with him a number of times. And I watched this man genuinely exude compassion, exude wisdom. He was a sweet soul, and he's recently died he was in his 80s. And he touched me very deeply. And I think along the way, others have touched me very deeply. Eckhart Tolle has touched me very deeply. I think he has a genuine place of wisdom that he comes from. Jack Canfield, I don't know if you know the Buddhist teacher, Jack Canfield, but he's spoken at Alternatives, and he exudes kindness. It's like this man is kindness. And we did a 5-day retreat with him, which I organised, and I realised that he was living what he was speaking. And Liz Gilbert has also touched me, like Eat, Pray, Love. Have you come across that book?
No.
And Julia Roberts played her in the film of Eat, Pray, Love. And Elizabeth Gilbert had came to London and spoke for us, and she'd recently lost her partner and was very distressed. And she and I went out for tea, and we had this really deep dialogue about loss, because I was able to speak about Melissa, she was able to speak about Rhea, her partner. And we established a very deep connection. So I think for me, when I get influenced by others, it's because there's a deep connection and there's a recognition that they have something for me, they have something to educate me with.
So Malcolm, what's the big message? What's the most important thing that you want the public to know about your work?
I think make a practice of whatever it is you want to do, because it doesn't just come of its own accord. If we really want to make our lives meaningful, we have to find a practice that will give us real authenticity in our lives. So make a practice of being kind to others. Make a practice of looking after your body, eating wholesome food. Make a practice of meditation, that actually you're attuning yourself. Make a practice of listening to good music that will lift your spirits, that will touch you at a soul level. Make a practice of gathering friends around you who you can trust and who become part of your support network. And then find whatever your own practices are. I think the other thing I'd like to say is that one of the things that I've also put across in this book is creativity. But actually, when we've been through something, we can find creative ways of dealing with that. So if maybe we'll write poetry, for me it was writing that book, maybe we'll do art. And so find what your creative, inner self is wanting to come out with, and give some voice to that, give some time to that. I think that's part of the benefit of the lockdown, is we found ourselves with more time, so our creativity can come into play. So they're the things I would say, Dennis.
Your advice about exploring our creative outlet, that really resonates with me, because my creative outlet is really blogging and YouTubing, and this is how I really try to make sense of the people that I meet and my experiences. It's really a very helpful message. Now, for the last years that you've been working within this area about kindness and compassion, I'm quite sure that you've come across with a number of misconceptions. So if you could just tell us some of those misconceptions that you've come across and kind of, try to address those.
Well, I think, for example, kindness, we can think of kindness as sugary sweetness. And one of the things I do in my groups is that if someone is, say, in the center of the circle, and sometimes they've gone through a really deep experience, I'll ask people to come and put their hands on that person, just to give them human connection. And what I always say is, only do it if your heart's guiding you to do it. Don't do it in order to think you're being kind. So for me, kindness is something that springs from the heart and that we can cultivate and develop. But I would say that phony kindness is sugary sweet, and we don't trust it as well. And compassion, again, is something that needs to be developed. Compassion has got to be developed over a lengthy period. It's like learning to actually really see that whoever we meet, they're all on this human journey. They're all going through their own stuff.
I was just going to say, if you're actually the one trying to provide kindness, it's kind of tricky, to balance it between being, compassionate and trying to be, trying to give a helpful feedback, especially, and not just in, let's say, not just in the workplace, but, in every other aspects, because you try not to offend people. And I like what you said, but we should not really, go to the danger of trying to, walking on eggshells.
I think look at what's possible. Look at what's possible with that. But if someone is so stuck in their own denial of things,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not a great idea to go in there with a sledgehammer and try and crack through
Mm-hmm.
it. So sometimes you'll make an input, and you'll see that they'll either respond, in which case you can make another input, or they won't. And for me, the skill is the sensitivity, that you'll see that perhaps this is not their time to move through something. And so there's a practice of also seeing who can receive what it is we have to give. And that's something that gets refined over years of practice. For me, years of practicing as a therapist.
Mm-hmm. And Malcolm, I know your book is an excellent resource, but aside from your book, can you recommend a good resource for those who'd like to explore more about kindness, compassion, and spirituality?
I would say check out Eckhart Tolle
Mm-hmm.
on YouTube. I would say check out Tara Brach, B-R-A-C-H.
Mm-hmm.
She's a meditation teacher, and Jack Canfield, K-O-R-N-F-I-E-L-D. They're really profound teachers of meditation and kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And check out Ramdas, even though he's no longer with us. He was a real pioneer of the whole spirituality movement. That's R-A-M-D-A-S-S.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of this stuff you can get on YouTube. And I often start the day.
Mm-hmm.
This morning I listened to a podcast with Russell Brand and Eckhart Tolle, which was the first time I've seen Russell really quiet as well. We put him on it as well. But it's the first time I've noticed that he was really quiet and respectful, because he knew he was in the presence of someone who really did have the answers. Be careful, by the way, this is also what I'd want to say to people about Robert Johnson, who wrote the He, She, We and other books like that, wrote a book called, I can't remember what the title of the book is, but he said in that it's very easy to give away our gold. It's very easy to project onto another person, this teacher has it all. In reality, we are all a mixture of the profound and the profane. You know, there are bits in us that are amazing, and there are also bits in us that are rubbish. And so we can have compassion for the fact that all of us are on that journey. But I do see that there are very few, but there are some teachers who I see as absolutely having mastery over themselves. Again, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher, who was nominated by Martin Luther King for the Nobel Peace Prize in the 60s for his non-violent resistance to the Americans in Vietnam. He's someone who I see as he's in this place of stillness all the time.
I'm just curious though, why is it that when we talk about compassion and spirituality, we always tend to link it with Buddhism and not just any other religion? Well, presumably all religion would try to, preach about kindness and tolerance, but what's something about Buddhism? Pardon my ignorance, I'm not really familiar about Buddhism. I'm an atheist.
You just said a very good thing there, Dennis. You said, and preach about kindness. Actually, it's not preaching we need practices that will help us find it within ourselves. And for me, Buddhism isn't a religion. Buddhism is a philosophy. And it's a philosophy I'm very interested in. I've had an interest in that philosophy for nearly 40 years. And for me, it's not, you're not asked to believe anything. You're doing practices to take you to a place of understanding. And for me, once I've experienced something, then I know it's true for me. If I haven't experienced it, I've got to take you. If you tell me, Dennis, listen, life is about a bowl of cherries, and I say, well, I haven't experienced that, then it's not really my truth. So for me, whatever brings us closer to our genuine experience is also truth. And by the way, I'm not just linking this to Buddhism. There are people like Thomas Merton, who's the Catholic saint, who was an extraordinary teacher. I think they can come from all traditions, but there are people who do embody the very teachings of compassion and kindness.
And Malcolm, how do you relax? What's your distressing outlet?
I like playing bridge. That's one of mine. I like long walks in nature. I like hanging out with friends, and I enjoy meditation, and I also enjoy yoga, which I've discovered only in about the last 10 years. Has become a part of my life. So for me, that's a great relaxation. And also listening to beautiful music, and music can take me to such a deep place.
What sort of music do you listen?
Well, I like people like, my hero is Leonard Cohen, who's probably not quite your thing, you're a bit younger. So when there are beautiful lyrics along with like exquisite harmonies and things like that, I like that. So Leonard Cohen, Neil Young, Bob Dylan, Katie Lang, So artists like that who have great lyrics and put real soul into their music, they're the people who really turn me on.
Okay,
Also great authors.
Sorry.
Yeah, great authors as well. People like Herman Hesse, Aldous Huxley, and people who have discovered in writing something can bring across a load of truth.
Mm-hmm. Books and music, perfect. So Malcolm, what else is in the pipeline?
Well, for me right now, it's the book I'm really focusing on, and I'm doing a podcast for Psychologies TV, which has got 1.3 million viewers back at the end of September when the book comes out. And I'm looking to really promote the book. I'm going to move to, at the moment I'm living in London, but I'm going to move back to Devon where I lived for quite a long time. I have the feeling that I want to be more in nature now. And so I'm going to see what that's like. So that's in my pipeline. But I think really it's just sort of continuing to do the work that comes to me and continuing to develop myself as a human being and to stay, as Bob Dylan puts it, may you stay forever young. So,
and carry on slaying your dragons.
And carry on slaying your dragons, yes.
Yeah. Well, Malcolm, it's been an insightful conversation with you, but unfortunately our time is up. Thank you for sharing to us about your book. I'll put the link to your book on the video description. It's been really fascinating talking to you. I look forward to hearing more about your work and all the best.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.